This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are back here in the studio in Colorado, getting ready for the Consumer Electronics Show this year in Las Vegas. If you are going to be at CES, drop me a note at phil@killerinnovations.com. Would love to connect with you and invite you out. We will have the mobile studio out there again this year. We will be parked across the, nearly right outside the door of Central Hall at the Convention Center in Las Vegas. You can come over and check out the mobile studio, and love to meet you. So if you're going to be at CES, drop us a note and let us know. Now, if you've been following our CES broadcast over the years, you know that we have a pretty regular set of guests that have been involved in the industries for quite some time. We bring them back every year to kind of give us their thoughts and opinions. This year, we're actually pulling one of the guests earlier, doing a pre-CES conversation. This is Steve Guggenheim. Steve is is with Microsoft. He's been on the show many, many times in the past, and he's joining us from Montana today via Zoom. We thank Zoom for being a great sponsor of this show. So, Steve, thanks for joining Killer Innovations today.
It's awesome to be here. I'm sorry I won't get to see the mobile studio, one of my favorites, but I'm glad we get to do this over the video conference line.
Yeah. Hey, so Steve, you've been at Microsoft for how long now? How many?
26 years.
26 years.
Yeah.
That means you've almost outlasted Bill before he retired.
Probably in that range, though. I think he will be long remembered past me for the right
I don't
reasons.
know. You've had a great influence at the industry. You and I knew each other pretty well when I was at HP, and you were working on the OEM side of the business at Microsoft. But more recently, though, you've been focusing on a lot of the work around. We talk about it in the context of AI, but it's much broader than that. And as we were talking prior to the starting of the show, you've been involved in really creating, I don't know, for lack of a better descriptor, these new kinds of, building blocks, bringing technologies together that, much broader people can take advantage of rather than being these specialized things. And, last year, my CES prediction video, which I was actually just upstairs laying out with the team. Last year, I was pointing out about the overhype of AI, right? And AI is one area that you are heavily involved in. Are these new kinds of building blocks, you think, where things are going to help translate these things from hype to real? Do they actually become real this year?
Well, yes. I mean, they become realer. I love to think about them as our new generation of building blocks. If you come out of school today, you don't really care about compute, storage, and networking, which is what you and I grew up with. You care about artificial intelligence, mixed reality, blockchain, IoT, maybe quantum computing if you have a physics background. And so each year, everybody, it's the year of AI or the year of mixed reality or virtual reality or the year of IoT. The truth is, no, not really. Each year is the growth of these building blocks, and we're in that grinded out phase. Like when we grew up when we went from 286 to 386 and 386 to 486 and 486 to Pentium, it wasn't like that was the year. Like we were just grinding away, trying to build better software and better hardware and taking advantage of these new capabilities. That's where we are with AI. Like people are grinding away. They're trying to put it to use in real world scenarios. Simple things in some ways, whether it's virtual agent or, process automation or, image recognition, basic building blocks, language translation, video. There's just tons of, grinded out things that are practical uses for all of these new building blocks. And so this isn't going to be the year where there's a ta-da moment where AI suddenly comes out of the shadows and, becomes the center of everything. But it will be another year of progress for sure. And next year we'll look back and say, gosh, we made progress.
Well, what do you think the progress is? I mean, look, everybody uses the term AI, but what we've really been focusing on for the last couple of years is really this huge influence of machine learning into, real time, the real applications, whether that be machine learning on voice recognition, so you get things like Katana or Siri or whatever the voice control system that's out there these days. So if you looked at what's happening and you talking about this, just that continuous progress, what's that next thing for AI that's beyond machine learning, but it's not the ta-da, we solved world hunger solution?
Right. To me, it's the practical application. It's, do we use computer vision in manufacturing for quality assurance testing at scale? Do we use voice recognition for language translation at scale? The Olympics are coming in Japan. Japan's a country where English is not, or many languages are not highly spoken. Can we use, language to language translation real time in a way that's practical? Can people build virtual agents that really can answer questions in a practical way? What can we use both from machine learning and then ultimately in a predictive nature? Can we be better at forecasting for manufacturing? Can we be better at forecasting for sales? How do we take every professional role, whether it's medicine or legal or sales or teaching, and how do we infuse a little bit of AI, as a tool to help them be better or faster or more capable? And that's where you see the energy going. It's not let me create the Star Trek, console, in the front line, but how do I help a doctor have more time?
Well, but this begs the question then of what's the role of, these new kinds of building blocks? Because, okay, I'm a company I'm a manufacturer and I want to use AI to do quality assurance, right? But you would think I would need all kinds of specialized expertise to understand how to apply AI to that, right? And so that becomes kind of a real, I'd love to innovate that way, but, I just can't acquire that kind of expertise. How do you solve that problem?
What you're seeing is the tools get better. So if you're an AI expert and you want to build your own models from scratch, hallelujah, get to it. If you're a manufacturing company that has one person that knows a little bit about what AI is, but really isn't going to build their own models from scratch, the good news is the tools are at the point where you can essentially feed in your own images, into it and create your own algorithm specifically for quality assurance testing. And then if you did that 5 years ago, you needed to know what you were doing at the base level. Right. Today, we're getting to the point where you're making it practical for people to use sort of AI fundamentals and infuse what they're already doing. And so when I look at AI, I think, okay, there's one group of folks that are plumbers by trade and build both plumbing. That's something we do, and build on top of plumbing, researchers. There's another thing, which is just to infuse AI into your standard business processes or tools or products. And that's where the tools are getting good enough. So if I am a manufacturing company and I want to hire one person or two people to work on this to make it a reality, I can do that versus having to go hire the graduating research class from Stanford.
Right, exactly. And there's always been the kind of, what we used to, I don't still use the term, right? It's kind of the ISVs out there that take the tool sets and then apply it to a specific industry vertical, whether it be healthcare or manufacturing or automotive or whatever. Are they more generic ISVs, or are there specific ISVs who are saying, I'm going to be an AI ISV to apply to that industry?
There's both. And so there's a whole group of brand new ISVs that are staking their claim on an AI solution. So I'm going to build the customer care virtual agent for banking in North America. I'm going to build the computer vision drone, company for power line checking. I'm going to go build the natural language processing tool set for speech recognition for the medical industry. So there's a whole new set of startups that are trying. The question is, do they hit the timing right so that they're still in business when there's enough, capability both in the product or technology and interest in the marketplace, or have they not been able to hold on long enough? And so the second set is your traditional ISVs, and there's a whole generation of line of business, vertically oriented ISVs that are that are moving out of the traditional client server world into SaaS. And as they do that, they can start to take advantage of these new building blocks, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's mixed reality or virtual reality. And so there's a really interesting conversation going on right now with thousands of traditional line of business ISVs. Typically, they're vertically oriented and region or country oriented. They have to make the move, the infrastructure sort of move. So now they're moving into SaaS on top of it. And they get to build it, take advantage of these new building blocks as they do the solution.
And perfect. And when we come back, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Steve. But I want to talk specifically about this transition of even the smaller things going over to as a service. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the Biz Talk Radio Network. Welcome back to the show. Hey, Steve, as we were wrapping up the last segment, we were talking about this migration of everything going to the cloud. We've kind of seen the big things moving to the cloud, and there's always been at least this perception that there's just some things that don't go to the cloud. But you're seeing more and more make that transition than what would have been predicted 3 years ago or 5 years ago when the whole, cloud migration started to happen. Is there an end to this? Does everything go to the cloud? What are some of the things you're seeing as far as going to the cloud that historically have never been there?
Well, the broader conversation now is the industry specific, line of business, vertical pick your term application. So what's happened is in the last, let's call it 5 years, could be 10. We've gotten to the point where, larger organizations have started to move their infrastructure to the cloud. They're starting to build sort of their own, services based on the PaaS layer in the cloud. And so the notion of moving to the cloud, we're sort of past moving to the cloud. People are going. So then the question becomes, okay, now that I've got my infrastructure over there, what about the rest of it? And it turns out every industry has its own specialized set of applications that have been around for quite a long time in many cases. So if I'm the automotive dealership, if I'm the legal office, if I'm the real estate office, if I'm you pick it, any sector, any place. And so the logical question for all of them becomes, hey, might as well take my apps over to a SaaS model if I'm going to go in this direction. And so what happens then is that long tail of vertical line of business ISVs have to make that journey over to a SaaS-based offer as well. And they have to go through all the same changes we did, which is, how do you manage the street when you're sort of moving off a licensing model and on to a monthly active user, daily active users, services model? How do you comp your sales force? How do you work with your partner ecosystem? How do you help your customers through the transition? There's just a bunch of work that goes with it. And that long tail of ISVs, we're having that conversation now in full force.
Well, if you remember back, this is going to be 2009, 2010 maybe, there was a number of us, including when I was at HP, do you actually go to, put the whole, PC as a service, right? We got the whole thin client thing going, but I mean, that was, it was great for banking cashiers, because that tended to be one application for it. But, the technical hurdles, though, for some applications just don't play well in the cloud. Has that been solved, do you think, or?
Well, I think of it a little different. I mean, we're at a point in time where there are just more and more processors, being, implanted into more and more devices. And based on what's available locally, you do more or less locally or not. And so for something that needs more local horsepower, you want to have that, so that capability on that device. For things that need less horsepower, you don't necessarily need as much of a device, but it's much less about, hey, I'm going to, use this device or that device. The truth is, I want my service to run on my mobile phone, on my tablet, on my PC, right, maybe on my thin client. Maybe I want it hooked up to some sensors that are doing something on the edge, and whether it's an AI model associated with that service or just the simple fundamentals of the UI of that capability of that experience, it's going to adapt to the hardware that it's working with. And I think that's much more the world we're in. And the service back end and Fabric just give us the ability to adapt to whatever we're connected to.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because in fact, if you look at the typical user today, the number of devices that people are carrying, right? I'm sitting here with this. I've got my HP Studio with an i9 in it that I do all my audio and video work on. I've got an iPad Pro, which basically is my Comcast DVR when I'm on airplanes, so I can watch my DVR content when I'm flying around. So it's a very expensive DVR, but it's a very nice DVR. But at the same time, I can get my Microsoft Office on my iPad just as well as I can get my Microsoft Office on my laptop, and all my documents are there. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care who I am, where I'm at, and everything is synchronized. So the day of being device locked in is going away, effectively.
And your best example is, when you get a chance to talk to Phil Spencer about the cloud-based gaming and what's going on with the, cloud-based back-end, gaming capabilities. So instead of needing a dedicated piece of hardware to play games over time, I'll be able to play games across a wide range of devices. And again, based on what's on that device, I might have a higher fidelity of the video and audio, or slightly lower fidelity, but I get to play on all of them. And so there are very few services or experiences, I guess I'd say, / applications that won't over time become adaptable and run across a wide range of screens.
Well, gaming is an interesting one, because there's been a whole bunch of companies that have tried it. EA tried it, didn't go that well. You had OnLive, they tried it, went through 2 bankruptcies, and then finally folded. There's been a bunch of trials, and again, it gets back to, not trying to peanut butter it. Like, AI is going to solve world hunger. Same thing with cloud, and let's say all games can play that way. No, maybe not. It's being smart about the right technology with the right solution set.
That's right, and I think that's the ability to have adaptable, services or experiences that adapt to what you're working on. Look, there's a bunch of really sort of low-level processors and and radios out there that you're not going to do, high fidelity, high action or high intensity type experiences on top of it. But gosh, they're going to be really good, remote sensors for you, and they're going to provide you with information that you need versus something I'm going to play a first person shooter on.
Right. Exactly.
I think Satya started to talk about, Azure in many ways is the world's computer. So having a computer fabric that's somewhat pervasive, that allows us to work with lots and lots of screens and processors in the right way for the right experience. Having the back end for that is what sort of the cloud is providing. And now it's up to every sort of ISV and experience provider out there to start to take advantage of that and then tune for their users, their experiences, their industries, and build things that are going to sort of be future-proof against whatever new device comes out and whatever new capability.
Well, I think you bring up a point, though, right? Because if you think of Azure as the world's computer, the one thing you can't win against is distance, right? How far is that user from that resource that you're going to take advantage of? So there's this whole thing we talk about in the broadband industry of edge compute. Do I bring in and put something in that acts between the cloud and the user, but literally embed it right into the network to get that benefit? And as you and I were talking prior to the start of the show about both of our passions and curiosities and interests is in tech and rural. How do you address the rural broadband or the rural issues for supporting rural communities? So we're going to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick up this conversation talking about rural broadband and rural technology. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. Welcome back to the show. Hey, Steve, as we were just going to the commercial break, we talked a little bit about, all of the services going to the cloud and what that it's going to look like to allow people to work from wherever. But as you and I were, again, talking before the show, we both have a lot of interest and passion around the challenges in the rural areas, right, where kids don't have access to some of these services. They don't even have access to broadband, right? As I shared, 15% of homes inside the U.S. don't have access to broadband, not because the ISPs, whether they be Comcast or Verizon or AT&T, whoever, don't want to serve them. They can't even get to some of these locations because there's just nothing there to get them there, right? And you were sharing that you're actually getting ready to talk to a bunch of high schoolers in a rural part of Montana, right? And how do you I don't know. I guess I'm even drawing a blank for the question, because this is something that I've just been thinking a lot about is, what's the challenge there?
Well, there's a couple of challenges, and you started with the first one, which is, bandwidth across Montana. Try and get cell service all the way across Montana.
Right.
So you can't rely on 5G or satellite or anything else. And so one broad challenge is just connectivity here. But the second one is, in a small sort of ranching town, essentially, this place is either ranching or lumber or mining for the most part. Once you get out of Missoula or Bozeman, where you have a university, what's the opportunity for tech? And frankly, what's the opportunity in general if you're not going to, work on the ranch? And so I for sure don't know the answer. I find it pretty interesting. I'm going to go take a run at, having a conversation with the kids and at least trying to hopefully help them get some perspective around life outside of a small town, because most of them aren't traveling into Seattle or Denver or San Francisco on a regular basis, not seeing what's there. And then, how do you create opportunities for yourself? And, what does schooling provide versus online versus, other avenues? I don't know whether, military or trade work but how do you give yourself opportunities? How do you think about technology? Try and encapsulate what something like Microsoft means relative to a small town. And so my simple example, for example, Billings is the largest city in Montana, and it's, 120,000 maybe, in that range. Microsoft, we employ 140,000, from 100 different countries. And so if you, how do you stretch yourself? How do you think about what the broader world looks like? And unless somebody comes and chats about it, there's no connection there. There's no natural connection. And I think the flip side of that is, how do we in the technology community help, these smaller towns? And what is help? Is there something useful that we can do? What can you do to create either a technology center or an outlet, or maybe it's not a technology center. Maybe technology can be helpful in other areas. But what can you do to towns that essentially are struggling to stay alive because the core backbone of what made those towns successful in the beginnings isn't the backbone anymore? Yeah,
well, as I shared with you before, we've been doing or trying to expand doing a series about rural innovation. And so a couple of Christmas ago, I was down in Paducah, Kentucky, right on the Ohio River, right? It was an old town that was basically used to ship crops. It was a port town to ship crops up and down the Ohio, and the Mississippi, and, textile manufacturing along the river, right? All that's gone away, right? They can't keep the youth in town. As soon as they get out of high school, they're going to Cincinnati, they're going to Nashville, they're going to St. Louis, they're going to, in their minds, the big towns to try to make a living or whatever. And what I found was really interesting about Paducah was they went off and they built this little makerspace. One of the teachers applied for a grant, got a grant, $125,000 or whatever. And then, I don't know if you follow what Steve Case has been doing with Steve's foundation. He put another $100,000 into a business in Paducah called Finn Gourmet Foods that works in the fishing industry along the river. And you're seeing a resurrection of Paducah. And kids like saying, something, I could start a business here. I could be an entrepreneur in my town. I could be, do something here, bring something back, something I'm passionate or interested about. But, The big challenge though is how do we solve the challenge of them not feeling so isolated, right? That they're part of a bigger community, right? And it's one of I can tell you, at least from our industry's perspective, it's the number one topic that gets talked about is rural broadband. How do you bring some form of connectivity? And there's not a solution. It's not going to come from just the fiber guys. It's not going to come from the cable guys. It's not going to come from the 5G guys. It's not going to come from the satellite guys. It's going to require a different kind of level of conversation where everybody comes together to figure out how do you serve those 14% of homes. I can't think about 14, 15% of U.S. homes having no broadband. How does a kid do homework if you don't have some form of connectivity? And how do they even become aware that there may be something out there they're interested in if they don't have the ability to learn about it or to see it or to watch it? Now, I'm not a fan that's saying everything on the internet is great and helpful. Some of it's not so great. Yeah, but for sure. Just opening people's eyes to say, wow, I could do that. And that's something I'm interested in. It's a problem.
Well, this is the population of all of Montana is 1 million, people. And it's because of the size of the state, it's the least densely populated state in the, continental U.S. So you have that challenge in spades, which is the space between cities and peoples is so vast. You don't have, broadband everywhere. You don't have broadband. You don't have cell service in lots of places. So it's a real interesting challenge. And then on top of that, there's not the natural infrastructure for, a FIRST or a Makers lab, right. Or there's not a center of gravity for any kind of technology really in most of the towns, unless you're in the college towns. There's not something there. So it's an interesting. Somebody posed the question to me in a simple way. They said, "Hey, would Microsoft open an office here? You're here," and that sort of got my mind thinking. Well, the answer is no, because I can't get 100 people like me, working on a specific technology here, because they just wouldn't move here. So then the question becomes, okay, what would a center of gravity look like in a small town that's primarily a ranching town or a farming town in any state? And I don't quite know the answer. And so it just poses this thought process. So then you get back to, okay, well, step one, crud, let's just at least go have a conversation with the kids. Right. Talk a little bit about technology and, both life, in Deer Lodge and life outside of Deer Lodge, and, what the industries do and what kind of opportunities there are, and maybe get some ideas from them, truthfully, and hopefully spark some interest in a conversation.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I mean, what I've found in my travels, now that we've been trying to work on expanding this series on the rural innovation, is in this case, like in Paducah, it was a husband and wife. They started in New Orleans. They started their work there, and they chose to go to Paducah as a small town to try to, change and transform a town that was struggling. But they had their own ideas, and they went off and tried it. And there's lots of these kinds of individuals who are saying, something, I don't have the answer, but let me go sit down and figure it out. And if everybody, picked off just a couple of these towns, you could start having you can start seeing a little bit of a groundswell to have some kind of an impact. But it's got to be, you can't come in from on high and say, I've got the ultimate answer for small rural, sure. survivability, because every town, every community, every residence is unique and different. Their interests, their desires, the culture of their towns are different. How do you? It's I don't know. This is probably one of my biggest frustrations. Is knowing what look. I grew up on the south side of Chicago in a pretty rough part of town, right? And I'm one of the few kids in my neck of the woods that kind of punched through, And I saw that opportunity that tech gave me. And I'd like to have that for every kid that's out there that's interested in it. If it fits for them, that's great. If they want to be tradecraft, that's great also. But allowing the kids not to be constrained by the fact of where they live can have a huge impact on a community.
That's right. And I think helping kids think about creating their own opportunities. Yes. And at the end of the day, you just want choice. And the ability to give yourself choice, it's going to take some work and some effort. And if we can help guide kids, that's a great thing.
Perfect. We're going to be right back with continuing our conversation with Steve. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network. Welcome back. So, Steve, as we've been talking through this, everything from the new building blocks to cloud and what that transformation has happened. We talked about the rural technology, rural broadband, rural communities. The kind of one of the themes that we were talking during the commercial break on, which is around this concept you have around continuous transformation. Can you describe what you mean by that and what, over your history, particularly at Microsoft, what does that look like?
Yeah, I at this point in time, I end up, talking with lots of companies, and they want to understand sort of, what's Microsoft done? How have you evolved? What does change look like? And upon reflection, people talk a lot about digital transformation. My own mindset now is of sort of continuous transformation. Like the only constant at Microsoft has been change. And so I tried to sit back and think about, what's driven the change, and then how have we reacted as a company? And there's sort of three things that I bucket. The first is technology. As technology's changed, you make a bunch of decisions about how you run the business, about how you sell things, about how you work with partners. So when you go from client and packaged software to client server to internet to cloud mobile to intelligent cloud, intelligent edge, every one of those changes is changed to how you build software, how you sell software, how you have partners, how you organize, how you support your people. But then the second piece that sort of overlaps with that is scale. And, every company goes through these scale changes, from, 10 people to 100 people, from 100 people to a couple hundred to, maybe 10,000. And in our case, we've gone through, orders of magnitude of scale changes in my time. And so those all require sort of org changes and philosophy changes and operating framework changes. And then the third one, frankly, is the ethos of the company a little bit, or the culture. And that's often defined by the CEO. And so I always think of the Bill era as the what era. What you got done was sort of the focus. And when the Steve era, you added how, because the combination of scale and where we were, it's not just what you get done, it's how you got it done. And, did you bring others along? Do you work well with people? Are you growing the next generation? And I think of Satya a little bit as the why era. At this point, we're a pretty large company, influential in the industry and the world. So why are we here? How do we give back? How do we both run a great company, but also, have a really good ethos about what we stand for? And so when you mix technology and scale and culture, you get to figuring out that, change is the only constant. And then there's just a set of things to think about, which is, at the end of the day, look, there's no right organization model at any one of these things. So what you really need is an operating framework that allows everybody to work together as best they can. There's very rarely a right answer in these things. There's just decisions. So what's your decision-making process, and how do you stick with them? And so there's just a bunch of things to think about in terms of how you operate, and how you run the company, as opposed to, I'm going to pick the right org model, or I'm going to make all the right decisions. I'm going to, hire just only the best people. I mean, none of that stuff holds true. And so the question becomes, how do you operate through change over a long period of time, and make it work for your company and what you're after? And so that's where I'll spend energy when I'm talking with companies, and some of the things we've done, and sort of how do you curate the culture? How do we do that in today's world? How do we build an operating framework, and how do you stick with it? What are the operating mechanisms? At each one of these changes, how do you think about, how you compensate your sales force, how you talk to the street, how you work with your partners, and how do you help people through these things?
Well, and the transitions are always some of the toughest ones, right? Because you got people who bought in. They bought, in your case, they bought in with the, Bill, and then Steve comes in. It's completely different. People are saying, something? I was real comfortable in this one. This one, I kind of not very, in our case, it was Lou Platt, and then it was Carly, and then it was Mark, and right? Yeah. Every one of these transitions, though, it's helping people get through the transition, right?
For sure.
And were the transitions that big at Microsoft, or was it more of a kind of a? Because look, Steve was there when Bill was there, so it wasn't like something radically new. It wasn't something new from the outside. It takes
about a year, though. The transition in the moment doesn't feel like much. Once folks are a year in, you get a sense for, what they stand for and what the operating framework in that era is, more likely going to be, and the culture of the company. And, And the truth is, you lose people through each one of these transitions.
Right.
Whether it's
people will self-select out.
That's right. Yep. And whether it's a CEO and culture transformation, or whether it's the technology change, when engineers have to go from managing their sort of building software and letting the customer manage it, to building software and having to manage it themselves, so they're on the calls 7x24 when you run a service. That's a change.
Yeah, and and Microsoft has always been interesting, right? Because all of your leaders have been from the inside. It hasn't been like a big hire from the outside. So succession planning has always seems to be kind of a core philosophy at Microsoft, from the standpoint of that core leadership role. But at the same time, Microsoft has done phenomenally well when the tech underneath Microsoft has changed, when in some cases it's being driven by competition, right? Go back to the browser wars, or go back to, DOS 3.1 to Windows 3, and that whole transformation. And then even the cloud, the push on cloud. Microsoft has just had this phenomenal ability to react and make those changes as necessary.
Well, that goes back to one of the other things, which is you need the fundamentals in place. Like, if you don't have the fundamentals, at an operating framework, you are not going to be able to adjust and adapt. And I think we've been pretty lucky. We have a culture that invites, challenging ourselves all the time to make sure we're either doing the right things for customers and partners, or being honest about where we are in the journey and what we're offering, and not fooling ourselves.
Yep. Hey, Steve, as we wrap up the show, I just want to thank you again for taking the time. I know you're on holiday. Appreciate you joining for us for the show today. And we will always watch with bated breath what Microsoft is doing, because you guys are the leaders out there, and you definitely drive transformations across a lot of industries and help a lot of businesses be successful. So thanks again.
Appreciate you having me as always. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Steve. We'll be right back after another week here. We'll be back next Sunday for the show. If you got suggestions for guests, drop me a note, phil@killerinnovations.com. And again, if you're at CES, we'd love to see you. With that, we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.